I'm Connor Old, and welcome to this month's episode of Masters of Controlled Chaos, the first of these 6-7 months that I'm going to be doing. I guess only 6 months now. Before we get back into the Oscar seasons, if you don't know, every single week I'm going to be doing a series called Forgotten Oscar Films, but that's going to be happening every week. But this series, which I've been doing since the beginning of time, is going to be happening once a week. And this series, if you're new to this channel, is essentially where once a month I bring down a big video and I break down a director. I talk about the central idea as to what makes them great. I also look at 3 films that I think define their career and explain how their style sort of relates to that. And this one is one I've been looking forward to, David Lynch, because as I'm exploring one of these directors, I haven't seen really any of their films, and David Lynch was one of those directors. I hadn't seen any of his films going into this series, and really did a lot of research, really did a lot of analysis that I'm going to be talking about and trying to explain to you certain themes and common things that come across David Lynch's filmography, but also the general idea of what makes him great. Starting off, let's jump right into that central idea. I think David Lynch is a filmmaker who is often called upon because of his sort of surrealist elements. He's an American filmmaker that I think is very sympathetic to a lot of his characters, but in a lot of ways definitely surreal. And just a quick definition of sort of surrealism, at least sort of how I sort of perceived it. It's sort of very similar to something that's real, but it's not. It's more than real. It's a lot of times David Lynch's films are very they feel like the real world until they're not. A lot of sort of a good example is people throw the word around like dreamlike, for example. That's because, you know, in a lot of interpretations from people, because of how the brain works, when you go to sleep, your brain tries to keep you it's idly sort of awake while you're asleep, so it's trying to create images and sort of process things that you experience that day. So it's using real life experiences, but it's not sort of 100% there. It's not completely there, which is what sort of David Lynch is trying to capture. That common thing in dreams is that when people go into a room, a lot of times the light switches aren't working. So everything seems real, seems like your day life, but when you try on the light switches, they don't work, and then you know it's a dream, and then you go down that rabbit hole that I think David Lynch is so interested in. So that's sort of the surrealist elements, but the problem is that I don't think his films are for everyone. His films are kind of hard to explain in a lot of ways, which is why sort of I had some challenges trying to decipher his filmography. But I mean, really, the large thing that does make him great is this sort of subversion of the traditional story structure. I think a lot of people, it's not a bad thing, but the traditional Hollywood film, you're looking at what the story is and how you connect to the characters, and if there was sort of good acting, if there's sort of a poorly delivered line of dialogue or some cringy sort of corny acting, you immediately recognize that. Why? Because it's on the forefront. It's what you see immediately, and it's sort of easy to judge. But David Lynch isn't really interested in a lot of those elements. He's really interested in using film as a visual medium, and very much using images to elicit an emotional response instead of sort of relying on that story. And in a lot of ways sort of subverts these traditional things that we are accustomed to do and then subverts them. I like in a lot of his sort of films to say something like in artwork. You would say something like Tarantino or Sorkin film, they rely heavily on dialogue, and therefore sort of I would say rely almost on a music almost aspect to it, as also as being a sort of a literature obviously aspect. Film being the great sort of medium because it creates literature and music and visuals and sort of this one great medium. But that doesn't mean directors decide to single out certain areas. And I would actually probably say that film is a visual medium at its forefront, and that's sort of the main part of it. So when David Lynch does that, it creates a much more abstract, surreal way of doing things, because he's not interested in the story almost at all in a lot of his films. He's interested in eliciting an emotional response and creating unique images, which is, for over 100 years of film, kind of hard to do in a lot of ways. It's so many different types of blockbusters that I feel like I've seen this movie before. He does try to create unique images, which is admirable for sure. But I also want to mention that, it's a different way how you have to approach his films. You can't not sort of be invested in it in a lot of ways. You don't want to be too invested, but you can't be on your phone. You can't be passively watching. It's not a brainless kind of experience, because I think you can interpret a lot out of it, and then you'd be confused and then be frustrated. I think there's an easy steps that if you just, there's almost a criteria that I went into it not only for David Lynch's films, but if you just went on a whim and saw one of his films, even if you do know that's supposed to be weird and kooky, I mean, it really does sort of blow you out of the water how sort of abstract and not sort of clear it is. It doesn't follow the sort of traditional structure. It does sort of go on its own fact because he's not too worried about that. And as such, I think you have to treat it as you would treat a purely visual medium like paintings or art. For example, say you hear, a good piece of music, for example. You get goosebumps for it. You sort of recognize it. If you have a good story and you're invested in that, and it's great literature, you're into the characters and you sort of want to know what's going more. And there's sort of an easier sort of response to it, and almost you don't have to think about it. When you listen to great music and you get goosebumps, I mean, that's a sort of a raw emotional experience, a primitive experience that you don't have to analyze in a lot of ways. You can. I'm not saying that music is simple in a lot of ways, but the first emotional response I think is very it's not simplistic, it's not rudimentary, but I will say primitive for right now, just because it's such an illicit emotional response due to who knows what. But with some of the paintings, the point I'm trying to say is that you just look at a piece of images, and sometimes they speak to you, sometimes they don't, but sometimes you have to work to them. I think there's actually sort of an analysis kind of brain that you develop, and there's a way you sort of have to look at paintings. You can't just look at a painting and then be like, that's done. You have to sort of take your time and try to understand it, and almost be taught and sort of learn how to understand and appreciate that. This may sound pretentious in a lot of ways, but I think that some paintings, you look at them and you're like, when you're in real life and you're in a museum where certain ones connect you, and there's thousands of, hundreds of paintings, one of them connects you and you're like, oh wow, I want to take a picture of that one. I mean, that's sort of an emotional response. But sometimes what I found is that you look at a piece of painting and then you like it right away, but then you understand a little more. You see things in the background that, oh, look at this, and there's like dimensions to the play, that how your eye sort of goes across. You start in the center, what grabs your attention most. Sometimes it's not in the center, but usually it's in the center. And then your eye sort of gravitate towards different places, and then you see different people in the background, and that person may be looking at this person, and then, oh, what's this symbol? And I think in a lot of ways art is also sort of relationship to history, but that there's an analytical sort of skill that's involved with trying to understand and appreciate paintings that's not sort of really prevalent in something like music, for example. Which is why in a lot of his films, I think that's what David Lynch is trying to do, and why I liken him almost to a great a painter in a lot of ways, because what he's trying to do is use the film form to create very interesting visual mediums, and then how those sort of images come together as a sort of a whole unique sort of statement. But the problem is that his themes that he's trying to explore, normally with these, what makes him great, we look at the themes. Milos Forman's obviously an anti-establishment sort of theme of his filmography. Tim Burton, you could say, is about the outsider. But with David Lynch, his films are so abstract and so open-ended that the themes could be anything you put towards them. And I think that's what he's trying to do. In a lot of ways, in a lot of ways, his films are mystery. They're mystery movies. But he's not interested in the mystery itself, and sort of the conclusion and who done it. He's interested in the mystery. He thinks the mystery itself is enough to propel the story, and that one thing leads to another, and just unending sort of uninterrupted thing. I think in sort of traditional ways to build a really great thriller that's entertaining for all, you want to create a film where the audience picks up the clues before the detective does, that they pick up things through visual things, through dramatic irony and whatnot, and that you're in the seat and you're on the edge of your seat and you go, oh, this guy, oh, because this, oh, it's this sort of sense of revelation. Instead of the film telling you want to be able to do that, and that's what the great thrillers do. So when you're going to a film like Mulholland Drive or Blue Velvet, it's a great thriller. So you're trying to figure out piece out the plot. You go, okay, this guy's with this guy, and you try to keep things, you try to remember details. I think in a thriller movie, you're much more acute to details early on. That could either be MacGuffins and subvert your expectations, like say Hitchcock did, or for David Lynch, he just throws it out the window. He says, you're going to invest, you're going to invest, you're going to invest, and I'm going to make you invest, and I'm not going to give you anything, and then you're going to be frustrated, and then you're going to be mad, and then you're going to go, does this make any sense? But then I think either you do that through the entire film and then you're bad at the end of it, which, hey, that's fine. But I think what he's trying to do, and my experience was a lot of ways, I was frustrated, and then I just gave up. I was like, okay, I don't care about the story. I just sort of sat back, I let the images wash over me, and then I tried to understand how I felt about them afterwards. And then that's how I sort of went about every David Lynch film. And listen, I'm not a huge David Lynch fan in a lot of ways. Some of his films I think are too structureless, too abstract. I actually don't fit the form of film actually the best that he actually could have expressed it in a different kind of way. But when he does hit, I think it's a great element of structure, story structure, and the abstract. In a lot of his films, like I said, he takes the mystery genre and subverts it and just worries about the mystery, because he's not interested in the details. He's interested in how that makes you feel, how that you have to sort of do an introspective look, that once you're sort of given up with the story and what's going on with the little details, you look within yourself and you look at this image and you're like, why do I feel like I've seen this before? Why do I know this? Or what is it making me feel? I think many of his films, he's a great sort of creator of tension, and it's not relying on storytelling elements and building things in dialogue. It's just based on sort of a camera slowly going around a corner and just this creepy sort of eerie element that he's able to bring, this sort of mystery horror, which I think that's the sort of genre he may work in best. But he's also created sympathetic characters. And I do want to mention this briefly, that, in a lot of ways, there are surrealist filmmakers. Alejandro Jodorowsky, Louis Buñuel, but their films are very, I think, dominant on surrealism. But I think for David Lynch, when the term Lynchian really means the sort of surrealist elements. But for him, what I think when he does best is that he has a solid structure or somewhat forefront theme that the audience can relate to, and then express that theme through images, but then also offer some different elements that can therefore be interpreted and therefore go across. I don't think sort of abstract and surrealism just to be, crazy images just to be crazy and for you to interpret it is necessarily his strong suit, and I don't think that's going to relate to a lot of people, frankly. It's going to relate to some, but very few. At least what I sort of related to was ones that had sort of a traditional story mystery structure, and then he either subverted it, or went on a different path, or just completely did something different. Mulholland Drive, I was a big fan of. Blue Velvet, The Straight Story. I even like something like Wild at Heart. I did like sort of a good amount of his movies, but I think that even something like Dune, where he didn't care so much about the story structure and just tried to create crazy images, and even something like Lost Highway, which I think he just actually perfected in Mulholland Drive. I feel like you can put a lot of things onto them and you can read critical essays that think this way, but if you don't have an immediate response to it, that's my kind of rule, is that it doesn't deserve to have a rewatch in a lot of ways. Like if you watch 2001: A Space Odyssey and you're like, that's a really interesting movie, I'm going to rewatch it again, you can do that. But if you watch 2001 and you think, that's the dumbest movie I've ever seen, you don't have to rewatch it because it's the greatest movie of all time. You just didn't like it, and that's fine. So I think that having a sort of even a preconceived sort of notion of the mystery genre and then completely throwing out the window, like I think he does in Mulholland Drive, I think it's still fine as long as it has that, and it's not just 3 hours of crazy sort of extreme visual imagery, because that's thing's hard to connect to, and I think it kind of loses itself in the way, truth be told. But the other half of his filmography is really stories with sympathetic characters. If you say he has 10 films, including Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, the other, so I'd say about 6, so 60% of his films, at least sort of long feature-length film, he's done many shorts, but his films are surrealist and have that sort of elements. But the other half, I think, are story-driven and involve sympathetic characters going on a journey. Straight Story, Wild at Heart, The Elephant Man, That's why I liked him at the beginning to a painter, because he's not just a purely surrealist painter. Sometimes he loves the beautiful American landscape, or the horror that lies between sort of a black and white elephant man. Eraserhead, even though that's surrealist, he likes that black and white sort of visual imagery. So he's not just purely a surrealist filmmaker. He has elements to him, and almost half his films develop this. And I think actually understanding those films actually helped me understood and unlock the key to David Lynch's ultimate complete filmography. But that's my thoughts on what makes him great. In terms of what I think is 3 great movies, the first that I'm going to choose of his filmography is Blue Velvet. Now, I didn't talk about Twin Peaks because this is kind of a Twin Peaks-esque, and that I know Twin Peaks is a TV show, so I didn't want to mix it, even though that's such a huge part of his creative energy is into Twin Peaks, and a lot of his filmography explained by Twin Peaks. I just didn't want to go into it too much because that's a TV show, and we're not too worried about that right now. So I instead chose sort of Blue Velvet as the conduit, because in a lot of ways, the idea, the theme that he sort of goes back to, the idyllic American way of life, the traditional suburban life, and then seeing the underbelly, the horrors, and the mystery, and the strangeness that sort of lies in it, throughout sort of the seams and whatnot. And I think that's what he does here in Blue Velvet. he definitely explores this theme. It's probably most overt of movies in terms of message, but still really conveys that message in a lot of ways. And I think maybe it's actually one of the most accessible films in a lot of his ways. It's not necessarily as crazy as maybe it was in 1989, but the sort of the crime underbelly aspects of it, the sort of crazy, the psychopathic was the word I was looking for, but then also sort of the sexual elements, I think, also related and sort of connected to me. Most being, like I said, those psychological elements with Dennis Hopper's character. You know, at the beginning you think this is kind of a boring, traditional, I don't know, 50s traditional American way of life with the white picket fence, and this kind of cheesy dialogue, and I'm like, oh, this guy can't write dialogue. But it's not until sort of Dennis Hopper's character that we really get to see this great performance by Dennis Hopper, but into this great world of this crime underbelly. But it's really that sort of slow lead up and build to it that this movie does take its time, and that with, I think, both the characters, Kyle MacLachlan of Jeff, and then I believe Sandy, Laura Dern, they both slowly get us into this world and slowly build that curiosity. And there's actually a great sort of back and forth that I really enjoyed, where I would say that Laura Dern's character, Sandy, is more relatable and more of the audience character that you can project yourself onto than someone like Jeffrey is, because Jeffrey eventually kind of loses his way without saying anything, but he gets interested in the mystery first. He sees this woman and hears about things and finds the ear in the ground. You know, obviously it's sort of a great visual image of just, you know, the dead could be right across from this beautiful sort of suburban neighborhood with ants crawling over it, and it's really the seedy places of it. So it's that initial building up to it. It's the slowly getting inches more and more close to this underbelly just by looking in the right places and actively trying to figure out really what's going on here, what's really going on in a couple streets over past this suburban neighborhood. But like I said, I think Laura Dern's character is actually more relatable, because how Jeffrey's character, Kyle MacLachlan's character, Jeffrey, then goes and tells Laura Dern, and it's this sort of back and forth. It's this, okay, this is what I did, and I think we should do this next, and what do you think? And him almost getting her involved is almost like David Lynch saying, come on, join in on the mystery. But then in traditional David Lynch style, once we're in the mystery and once we're sort of acutely involved with it, and there's a great sort of scene in the closet as we're peering into it, like, you know, Jeffrey is like the audience is. I mean, I saw there's obviously with, you know, Jeffrey, I think references to Rear Window in a lot of ways. But I think as we're peering into it and as we're going into it, the strangeness happens. And once we're completely enveloped in it, it doesn't go away. You think, you know, okay, he's going to kill this guy, he's going to do things, but, you know, he's interested in psychopathic behavior, and he's going to torture him, he's going to put in these weird worlds, and there's going to be some memorable scenes with some singing. You don't know why he's there, you don't know where this is in the setting, and I think that actually helps the film, because you're like, we know where the town is, we know sort of the structure of the school and whatnot, but then when he goes into these certain places, it's hard to understand where this is and who these people are and where do they live. And it creates a real eerie sexual nature to it. But really, I think it creates this sort of psychopathic nature, but I got ahead of myself. The sexual nature of the film is really interesting as well, because Jeffrey, being sort of this 17-year-old, you know, not only is he kind of interested in the crime, but he's interested in the crime because of his interest in the woman, played by Isabella Rossellini, who gives a very sort of naked performance. She does get naked in the film, but she's also naked emotionally. She leaves it all out there in a lot of ways. And she's very emotional in the film, and she plays a very sort of disturbed and traumatic and touched character, who sort of lures Jeffrey in because of her beauty, but then has some sort of obvious sort of trauma and mental issues, I think, especially related to her sexuality, clearly a victim of abuse. But also, sort of, like I said, I think David Lynch is a sympathetic filmmaker. I think that there's that sympathetic aspect that you can sort of relate to and attach yourself to, because this character is kind of a tragic figure. She's in this world. She doesn't want to be in this world. She's a singer with a beautiful voice. She has this amazing talent, but she can't get out of this world, and she can't sort of come past these. And Jeffrey, in a lot of ways, you can say is, he's the hero. But I constantly see things, you know, a lot of people think, because it's this guy and he's trying to see this woman, and, you know, the problem, I think, maybe with that story that we've seen before is that the guy is kind of flawless and the woman is helpless. But in a lot of ways, I think what David Lynch does is he takes that sort of guy character that's trying to save her and makes him even more helpless and more clueless than before. He kind of seems ridiculous when he tries to stand up to this world, and when he's trying to fix her and trying to understand her, that he's almost gone just into a mess, and that this is almost none of his business in a lot of ways, but also that he doesn't understand it the way he thinks it is, which is why I think we actually relate to Laura Dern's character, who sometimes when, Kyle MacLachlan's character, Jeffrey, gets so into the story, where we still have that sort of level of removal, where we question it, and I think she creates a great balance to this film, which I really appreciated. But that sort of idea that I think is very well explored of the sort of crime underbelly in that sort of crazy world was well done and well photographed, and take that sort of traditional mystery structure and really sort of throws it out the window. And like I said, those sort of psychosexual elements that I really appreciated, especially being Jeffrey character being sort of a high schooler and understanding those, being a teacher and being sort of malleable to ideas and understanding that sort of appeal. I think it was a great sort of choice to be for Jeffrey to be a little bit younger, and then also have that balance of Laura Dern's character. That's about it for Blue Velvet. Let's move over into the next film which I'm going to choose, which may be a surprise. That is The Straight Story. Okay, so The Straight Story, this is one, like I said, maybe surprised a lot of people, but I think it's actually crucial to David Lynch's filmography, because with a director with so few limited feature films, I think that half of his films are actually not like that. You could say that, oh, Straight Story, this is his unusual, sort of traditional, straightforward Disney film, you could say, but then I go, what about Elephant Man? That's kind of traditional and sad and straightforward. What about Wild at Heart? What about Dune? I mean, these films in a lot of ways are straightforward, traditional kind of stories, and they're not these abstract surrealist films, and that's about almost half of his filmography is like that. So I wouldn't sort of throw that away and say this is not a part of his filmography, because I think this is a part of his filmography that doesn't get discussed maybe enough. I think he understands character, and this is his sympathy side to it. I said he's a sympathetic filmmaker and a surrealist filmmaker. This is his sympathetic side. That, in Blue Velvet, he kind of mocks the traditional American way of life and makes fun of it and satirizes it, and then shows the underbelly beneath. But this one, he understands it and he respects it, and that he puts a nobility and an honor and a wisdom behind the sort of grumpy old man figure that we've seen before, the one who's stuck in his ways, who won't do anything. Obviously, at the beginning, David Lynch creates some very funny moments in the film. I thought the movie was very funny, but really creating a perspective. Really a great American film in all ways, at least my sort of perception of that American film, of these great sort of sweeping landscapes, the idea of American persistence, that they're going to get things done no matter what, and sort of the drive that I think is associated with Americans and part of their culture. But also sometimes sort of conservative, maybe a grumpy nature of it that's maybe stuck in their ways sometimes. But sort of, I don't think, David Lynch makes fun of the conservative, grumpy old man character. He gives it some respect and gives it some nobility, and I think that, he's a man who, once he sets his mind to something, he's going to do that, and I think, that's a great character and a great movie to do, and make you understand this guy by how much he sort of cares, even though he's not really showing it. To travel, what ends up being almost 2 months to see his brother, is sort of a really incredible feat, and sort of the journeys and the people he meets along, and sort of creates some different life perspectives, and passes on his wisdom in a lot of ways, and tells his life story, and sort of slowly reveals that onion that is him. And Richard Farnsworth is brilliant in the movie. He's so good. And then Sissy Spacek, who I've just recently learned is one of my favorite actresses. I mean, she's been in so many great movies. I think she's a really great actress, and he has a real sympathy to this character, which I think could have been overdone. But on top of that, this is a 2-hour movie, which is a lot of Alvin, Richard Farnsworth's character, riding on a tractor to see his brother Lyle. And, that can be super uninteresting, but I think that the cinematography is really brilliant and sort of creating these great American sweeping landscapes. I mean, the blank field on the side of the road with the one road with the tractor, and he's carrying stuff behind him, and the cowboy hat. I mean, that's sort of a perfect kind of American image, at least as a certain part of America. And the story behind it is such an amazing story. Also, so very amazing, incredible score that keeps it going along by Angelo Badalamenti. I may be saying that wrong, but I think that he really propels the score forward and makes it movie going along a lot of times. And really, the thing with the score is that I tried listening to it on its own, and it doesn't work as well. It actually works best with the film and with the images, which I think, a great score really does that. I think a great score actually does both, but you want that to be the first and foremost, that you can't, that score works best when it's with and paired with those images and with the sort of beautiful sweeping landscapes. So I really enjoy that sort of cinematography aspect of it, but that Alvin's character and the idea that, he could have been sort of a stereotypical guy, but he really does care, and that, we see this guy and he's maybe, when we see he goes to the doctor, that he's set in his ways and he can't change, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have a strong emotional core to him, which I think makes him a relatable character. As the journey goes along, we understand more about his life and why he did certain things and his time in the war and sort of breaking down and understanding his point of view, and sort of the wisdom he understood in that. Just because he's old doesn't mean he's stuck in his ways and grumpy and cranky. He may seem like that at first glance, but he did 5 weeks without reading anything or anything. There's a real sense of peace and serenity to this film, which I really enjoyed. It's actually maybe one of my favorite David Lynch films. It's definitely up there, which is strange to say because it's an unusual David Lynch film, but I think the dialogue in this film is also really fantastic because, like Alvin, there's few words that are, if any, that are out of place. Everything's met with meaning and said, and even still, we think as he's sort of becoming more open to the audience, even when he comes to the end and someone asks him, do you want to come inside? Just use our phone. He's like, no, I'll be out here. He doesn't want to sort of intrude. He doesn't want to sort of go into that sort of household. He's on a journey. He wants to do it. He doesn't want to separate himself from it. And it may seem odd, it may seem weird, but he's got an honor code and a system that he goes by. And I think that's really honorable and a really interesting concept to do, and a different take on sort of the grumpy old man. And just a real peaceful film. I mean, this is a film that you want to fall asleep to, but in a good way. A film I really enjoyed, a very funny film, a very peaceful film. And a great performance, a real honest, earnest film that I think few come around nowadays. Which isn't sentimental, but is true and honest, which I appreciate. But that's Straight Story. The final film which we're going to talk about within his filmography is Mulholland Drive. Now this is a film that is eerie and dreamlike and similar to Blue Velvet, but also very much a film movie. And as a film fan, maybe this is why I connect to this one and say not Lost Highway or not sort of Inland Empire, but I think this represents definitely his second half of his filmography, where his visual style definitely changed, a lot more close-ups I found than something like Blue Velvet. I believe he shoots it on digital, but similar to Blue Velvet, takes that sort of traditional mystery structure, but then also flips it on top of his head, and really talks about LA and the film industry in itself. And a lot of people, rightly so, sort of get the sort of certain aspects of the film that are overt and upfront and go with those and relate to those, something like the obviously sort of dreamlike elements to it. But sort of the other element that I related to that was more upfront was less dreamlike, but also related to dreams, which is the idea of films in itself. As a film fan, I understand sort of how things work, and I think he does too, and he challenges that perception. I think this is actually one of the best filmmaking movies of all time, because yes, it's connected to film and sort of this industry, because the main character, Naomi Watts, she is an actress, an aspiring actress, from the big city, and she's coming to Los Angeles, and really sort of, I think David Lynch understands the horrors that are associated with Los Angeles and even the film industry, that you can take this sort of young, impressionable girl that has a certain perspective of Los Angeles and community, and realizes that the city is kind of lonely, and that there's real loneliness to it, and the idea of day and night, and the idea of a false sense of community that's trying to be created, and no one having your best interests in mind. I connected that too, because Los Angeles is in a lot of ways connected to the film industry, but also how films in itself are artificial, that they are dreams, that they are sort of made fake. They are people set up to recreate actions, and that a lot of times, when you watch, I just watched Notting Hill, that seems like it's a romantic movie, it's a funny movie, it seems like a real movie, but then every line that they say is like the best line possible. Every line is like the best thing to say, and that's so emotionally satisfying, because that's what I kind of want out of rom-coms in a lot of ways. So it's like I said before, it's like real life films, right? But then there's certain elevated aspects to it, and it's what we want to do. We want to be the big actor here. We want to say the right things all the time, even though we don't. I think David Lynch understands that the sort of the falseness of films and of sort of recreating things and trying to manipulate certain emotional responses, and then goes down his own other path. I think this is one of the scariest of his movies. It's definitely the most thrilling. Many times I was really just gripping my heart because I didn't know what was next or who we see next, because he's not one to show us different visual images. It's even just one-off scenes where the one guy there, I'm forgetting the actor's name, tells this really great story of this dream he had, and then how that sort of is revealed to be later on and what that means. So there's definitely the nature of dreams is definitely interested in maybe the capsulation of his filmography, because this is an idea he's been exploring and really concretely sort of says it in this film. But I think even more than Blue Velvet takes that mystery genre and subverts that and goes its own way in the second half. There's many revelations throughout the film, but I think that yes, the elements of film and yes, the elements of sort of dreamlike imagery are at the forefront, but that doesn't mean that they are wholly the entire thing. That doesn't mean that they are the only images. That you could say, oh, it's the easiest of David to just understand. But I think yes, which is why I think it's actually one of his best. It's easy to understand at first, but there's more to be explored underneath if you want to explore, if you want to understand sort of that side of David Lynch and understand more about the film. It's sort of an emotional gut impact right away, but you also want to go back. You also want to see those images again and see what that means and understood everything, and how in a lot of ways on rewatches you realize how much they tell you, which is great in a mystery movie, and then you can go back and see it. This is actually seen as one of the best movies of the 21st century. I don't know if I'd go there, but I understand why. It's got a solid sort of artistic element to it, but it's not as distant and hard to connect to than something like Lost Highway, I think, or even like Inland Empire or Eraserhead, for that matter of fact. There's very disturbing, horrific images in Eraserhead, but it's very kind of hard to. There's so many different interpretations. It's very abstract, I'd say, versus Mulholland. This one, which is much more. You can beautiful performances. He tells you one thing and then completely gets rid of it later on in sort of an easily understandable way, and therefore, when it does become less understandable, you're still with it. It's really just a director in control. He understands what he wants to say. He's not making it super overt, but he's giving you enough keys, enough carrots that are not just like, here's, a bunch of spaghetti on the ground, decipher it. He definitely tells you a little bit about it and gives you a little bit of your eye to sort of move across. This is why, like, a great painting, I think, gives you something and it allows you to sort of work your way through and understand as a whole thing, instead of just being like, here's a blotch of paint, interpret what you like, which I think a lot of people find frustrating and kind of, dumb with modern day art. He really makes this film to be specific and detailed, that it deserves rewatches, but it's also really well done on that first watch. And a film that kind of demands to be analyzed, but also a film that demands to be just not worried about and sort of let those images wash over you, and having a better emotional ride if you just try to understand your own emotional feelings by how you're reacting to these images in a lot of ways. But that's about it, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Maybe you've never seen David Lynch films. I'd probably start off with Blue Velvet, maybe Mulholland Drive. Straight Story is just a different one. I don't want to go there. You could do Wild at Heart. I'd like to see maybe after a few films you go with Eraserhead, and then the last films I'd probably see are Lost Highway, and you don't have to watch Dune, Inland Empire, as you sort of understand more of Lynch's filmography, but Blue Velvet's probably a good place to start. And that's about Straight Story. If this weird Lynchian things is sort of, you watch one of his films, you're like, this is too abstract for me, this is dumb, I don't get it, I'm not going to watch it. Watch The Straight Story, because that's actually a legitimately good, sort of straightforward, honest movie that is really one of my up there for in terms of Americana, which I just love that sort of landscape and the aspect. It's really beautiful. But that's about it, guys. Comment below, let me know some of your favorite David Lynch films. I'd love to hear that, and what you think of the series and who I should cover next. Next month, I'm not actually sure. I'm thinking maybe Terrence Malick, but maybe if you guys have a suggestion that I haven't covered before, that should be a lot of fun too. That's about it, guys. Stay tuned. Next week, I guess this will be posted on Monday, so this Friday, I'll be posting a video on The Places in the Heart, That's How I Feel film on Forgotten Oscar Films. That should be a lot of fun. And that's about it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. And until next time, stay tuned.